Hello there, and welcome to the Get French Football News preview show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Adam White and Samuel Rooke. Now, we've wiped off all the makeup, that would be, ate all the sweets and taken off all the masks. Well, except Adam, at least. It's time to get back to the football. But was it frightful for France's European hopefuls? And who's in for a scare this weekend, at least? A little bit of a post-Halloween binge after the latest headlines. Paris Saint-Germain strode proudly into the next round of the Champions League with a comfortable 5-0 win at home to over Anderlecht, which included a hat-trick, surprisingly, from left-back Layvin Kurzawa. Monaco's trip to Turkey turned into disappointment as, despite going ahead thanks to Ronnie Lopez, a Cenk Tosun penalty, I've butchered that name, it's Tosun, helped Besiktas draw 1-1 and push the league and champions on the brink of elimination. In the Europa League this evening, Lyon won 3-0 at home to send Everton crashing out of the competition with goals from Bertrand Traore, Ouassem Aouar and Memphis Depay. In the two later fixtures, Marseille dropped to a 1-0 defeat away to Victoria, with Patrice Evra being sent off before the game started after kicking it out at a fan, and Boubacar Kamara being sent off during the game for a second bookable offence. And finally, in Italy, Nice lost to Lazio due to a Maxime Le Marchand late own goal, which sees them only 2 points above Zulte Waregem, who won this evening. And that's all for your news, at least. But for all the latest, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfriends.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this evening with Paris Saint-Germain, who pretty comfortably walked into the next stage of the Champions League. And Adam, it was a really good result again for them. This looks like they're home and dried now, at least to get to the next round. But it should be relatively comfortable looking at going to top the group now, isn't it?
Yeah, you would hope so. I think that that 3-0 win over Bayern is obviously going to be the key result. If that game had been a little bit more sort of a narrower victory for PSG, the return of Jupp Heynckes at Bayern, as you mentioned before, would have been a little bit more worrying. But given that you would expect both teams to win all their games there's only one more game, isn't there? So the visit of Celtic, the Anderlecht, for Bayern to overturn that 3-0 deficit, they'd have to beat PSG 4-0 because it's a head-to-head record. A 3-0 victory would very likely put PSG through on goal difference. Their goal difference is vastly superior to Bayern's. So you'd imagine that their hope, from their point of view anyway, they're pretty much there as it stands. Although last season you would have expected them to win the group as well. They put themselves in a position to win the group, and they obviously drew at home to Ligue on the final day of the season. So they're not, as we're well aware of PSG, they're not too adverse to bottling it when you expect them not to. So it's still not sewn up by any means. Celtic will want to get into the Europa League, and they'll take that game seriously. Unlike Anderlecht yesterday, who I felt their manager felt not that they didn't take it seriously, but perhaps they kind of resigned to defeat before the game even started. I think their manager mentioned in the build-up that he didn't see how they could beat PSG at the Parc des Princes, which is a bit of an admission of that they don't feel like that it's a game that's going to be overly competitive, and few of their players didn't make that team. Teodorczyk, who's been in, was a very, very good striker last season, has really tailed off recently, but he was left out. And they look like a team who were resigned to defeat from the beginning, and it was easy for PSG. They controlled the game from start to finish. Layvin Kurzawa became the second PSG forward to get a hat-trick this season after Thomas Meunier's hat-trick for Belgium. And it was very, very simple. And it turned out, especially in the second half, after PSG got in front, to be a bit of a nothing event. But that's nothing. There's nothing PSG can do about that. They'll take the win, and they'll take the even more increased goal difference over Bayern Munich. And they'll take the positives from what was, albeit with pretty limp opposition, was a very, very good performance. And some confidence boosting performances for some players. So yeah, you'd expect them to win the group from here, but not that I wouldn't take it for granted just yet. But they're in a very, very good position, and it's their main early season objective is to win this group, because they've not benefited from not winning groups before. They've really sort of, as we mentioned last season, when they obviously came against Barcelona. So yeah, you'd expect them to win the group from here.
Yeah, and quickly a word from you, Sam, as well, about what feels like the strangest hat trick of the season. I mean, Layvin Kurzawa has scored plenty of goals in the past. He's not not a stranger to being in the opponent's box, but he's had a pretty bad season. Wasn't really great in this one, but he's ended up with 3 goals in the headlines.
It was bizarre. I don't think anyone would have bet on him scoring a hat trick. I mean, obviously. But even halfway through the game, you wouldn't have expected it. When he got a second goal, that was almost laughable in itself. Just crazy, so unlikely. And then the third just made it the perfect capper on what was a very strange game of football. As Adam mentioned, it sort of petered out early from being much of a spectacle, but that really added like a nice sideshow. He addressed his critics after scoring the hat trick with the finger to the mouth, shushing the critics. That's not gone down super well. Didier Deschamps has said he's going to speak to him about that, tell him to sort of keep his opinions to himself. It's been a strange season for Kurzawa. He began the season on fire last year, but it's been a long time since he's been very good. So really quite odd that he would get a Champions League hat trick. I don't think anyone would have predicted that.
Yeah, it was very strange. And like you say, his reaction was not greeted too well by even some of his fellow players, really. It was a very strange one in the end. The team that didn't do so well on Champions League week duty this week, at least anyway, is Monaco, who had the terrible sort of omen of trying to go to Besiktas, of all places, in the Vodafone Arena and try and get a result. And I was on this game, and it was another one of those Champions League performances from Monaco this season where they just never quite looked like they were going to win the game. It was a relatively tepid first half. Both sides tried to make something happen, but it was almost like they were trying to force it. And then Ronnie Lopez comes up with a really nice finish that Monaco maybe just edged in that first half, maybe deserved it. They sort of stuttered after Tommy Lemar had to come off for injury, and Jovetic come on, and Balde was forced out wide. But they again, in that 4-2-3-1, weren't quite clicking in the same way. And as soon as they gave away the penalty and conceded, it only really looked like it was either going to be Besiktas' day on the counter-attack, or it was going to stay as a draw. And unfortunately, that's how it's ended up. And Adam, they're 4 points off Porto now. They would need to win both their games to to guarantee it, because they play RB Leipzig first. They need to hope Porto don't win against the Turkish side, and then when they face the Portuguese side on the final match day, they need all 3 points. It's a real tough ask, isn't it now?
It really is. It's going to be such disappointment if they don't make it through in this Champions League group, because when it was drawn, you kind of felt like that they had a really good opportunity to make it through, because it was a very, very even group, and given they made the semi-finals last year, you would have put them as not favourites, but you would have put them as a pretty likely side to finish in the top 2. I still think there is a way out of this group for Monaco, though. Given how well Besiktas have played in the Champions League, they did well to get a draw at what is a very, very difficult place to go in the Vodafone Arena last night, or the night before now, sorry. No, last night. And you can imagine that, given how Besiktas played, as I mentioned, they could beat Porto, or, to be honest, Monaco, assuming they need to win both games, and they do need to win both games, a draw between Porto and Besiktas wouldn't be at the end of the world for them, because I don't think it would change too much what Monaco would have to do. So if they were to beat Leipzig as they visit the Principality, that would, even if Porto and Besiktas were to draw, that with Porto on 7 points and Monaco on 5, and then Monaco would have to go to Porto and win, which, given how they played against Porto at the Stade Louis II, seems unlikely, but it's not by any means beyond the realms of possibility. So you can see a way out of this group for Monaco, but not making it out, which still seems probably the most likely outcome, is extremely disappointing. And whether they would drop into the Europa League, whether they would take that seriously, whether they see themselves as a team that could win that competition, are all interesting questions. And they have talent to win that competition. Manchester United did it last year, obviously with a you would argue, but in a similar position, they didn't really expect themselves to be there, but they made the most of it, and it was a good way back into the Champions League. I don't think Monaco are needed as a way into the Champions League. I still think they're only second in Ligue, but it could be an opportunity for them to win another trophy. And if they do drop into that competition, then they'll be one of the favourites. So there are silver linings left in Monaco's season so far, and I wouldn't write them off in Europe just yet. And I would expect them to beat Leipzig at home. Given that the way the group's going, and given it's a game they need to win. So, although it's disappointing, I think that Monaco have chances to impress themselves upon Europe in the remaining 2 games here and after Christmas too. So not all lost, but very disappointing so far nonetheless. They haven't won any games in this group so far, which is pretty damning considering that they haven't really got any heavyweights in this group. Still, I think there's still stuff to play for them though.
Yeah, and this is a super competitive group, and we mentioned it when it was drawn, Sam. But you look at the place where Monaco are now; they obviously do need 2 wins. Then that starts with in 3 weeks when they have the Germans to host. But would falling into the Europa League be good for them, or would it possibly be even better for Monaco? Really, at least in league terms, to drop out of Europe altogether.
I think that a lot of the time we sort of say dropping out of Europe is better than dropping into the Europa League because you've got all these extra games. It's it's hard. There's lots of longer trips. It's not as much fun as the Champions League. But I think for Monaco and for this Monaco team where they are right now, extra games isn't really a problem. They've got the players. They're just still trying to work out their exact identity again. They're trying to work out how this large squad exactly fits together, what the combinations are. They lost so many players in the summer. They still need to really work out who they are again and which players that they bought so many, are the ones that fit into the places left by all those players that left. I think it would be a good thing to be in the Europa League because you'd have plenty of good competitive games against good sides. And as Adam said, they're good enough to go on a run. They're good enough to win that competition. There'll be plenty of good sides in it. There always are. But I think that'd be a good thing for Monaco to have another nice European run. It won't be as glamorous as last year, but they might go a little further than they did in the Champions League.
And as I always say, and as many Man United fans will attest to, it's another trophy in the cabinet if you get there as well. It's always worth going for. Let's move on to the teams that are currently in the Europa League, at least, and we'll touch upon all 3 very quickly. And I'll start with Lyon, Adam, who won 3-0 in the end this evening, and with an excellent second half, really, where they overpowered Everton with some really nice goals from Aouar, especially, and Depay playing a reasonably decent game as well, where they sort of slowly tore them apart. And after 2 draws where we were worried after the Limassol game especially that they were maybe fading in this group, 2 wins, and now they're in the driving seat, really. A point against the Cypriot side in a couple of weeks' time will definitely see them through, and that's what as we expected, isn't it? Even in what was a tough group on paper, at least.
Yeah, I think they'll be relatively happy with how it's gone so far. Everton put out a pretty weak team this evening, and a team that didn't look like it was capable of really winning this game without a striker in it, and with 3 defensive midfielders and young players like Benny Beningame starting, who may be promising, but it wasn't a team that looked like they were taking this game or this competition too seriously after what has been a terrible start for them. But from Lyon's point of view, they'll definitely take the result very kindly, because it was one that when the group started perhaps you would have seen as a difficult game. And although Everton, aren't the side in this competition that you would have hoped for, it's still a 3-0 win at home against them is still a very, very good result. And you would expect them to given that gap to Limassol, they got to play Limassol again, and Limassol got to come to them, I seem to think. So they're not 100% through just yet, but you would obviously with a 6-point gap with 2 games to play, you would obviously back them. I think that this could be Lyon's competition this year. We talked about Monaco last year a lot, obviously, on the pod, because we previewed them before. Lyon last year, on the pod, as they got to the semi-finals, and although that they've lost a couple of players in Tolisso and Lacazette, and their squad doesn't look as strong in terms of individuals this season, they could genuinely challenge for this competition again with the way that Mario Diaz is playing. He's scored a lot of goals in the league. I think he's on 8 goals, which is the 4th highest top scorer in Ligue 1, which is a decent start. After this being his real sort of first taste of European first team football, being on the fringes at Real Madrid, of course, and Depay playing well in this competition as well. He's played well tonight. Scored a header, which is unbelievable. He's one of those players you wouldn't expect to score a header. Everton seem to be seem to be letting unusual players score headers against them, with Ozil scoring one as well for Arsenal the other week. So a bit of an unusual situation. But they had the players again to go well in this tournament, with OR playing so well, and Fakir, hitting the ground running at the start of the season. So I think the really interesting thing is, what do Lyon expect from this season, and what do they expect from this competition? Do they expect to make the top three in Ligue 1, or do they expect to challenge for the Europa League? Possibly both. And as the season goes on and they start to rotate the players, they need to think a lot about which of those two competitions they want to prioritise. Third place is going to be extremely hard fought in Ligue 1. They're definitely good enough to finish there. But with the Europa League, as a bit of a sort of a caveat to that, in the games that it takes up and the fatigue it adds, and the rotation of the squad that's needed and the travelling involved, they may be finding third with the teams like Saint-Etienne and Bordeaux and Nice, who may end up getting back into that fight, and Nantes playing very well. It's going to be a really, really close battle. Marseille in there too. So they may end up thinking that the Europa League is a competition that they can genuinely win, and they may start to think that prioritising it would be a good idea. But obviously winning it's going to be difficult. So I think it's a very difficult decision for Genesio to make, and he'll end up probably trying to hedge his bets a little bit if they get to the latter stages, and they're still fighting for that Champions League place, because what this really boils down to is that Lyon see themselves as a Champions League team, and obviously both these are routes into the Champions League, and when you look at big clubs in France, they're up there. So it's whether they prioritise one or the other, and whether they feel they can make an impact in both or just one. So it'd be interesting to see how it plays out. If they keep their squad fit, who knows? They could easily finish in the top three and get to the semi-finals at least of this competition. So I think there's a lot more to come from Lyon in this tournament, and I look forward to seeing who they draw in the next round, which we assume they'd make, and it'd be interesting to see how they equip themselves against a side who are on an equal level to them. I know that Atalanta are a very good team, and Alejandro Gomez is an absolutely brilliant player, and they're going to be very difficult to beat. But I would still, in a latter round knockout tie, still expect Lyon to beat Atalanta. So if they get drawn against a genuine heavyweight of this competition, it's interesting to see how that goes. But some exciting times ahead in this competition, I think, for Lyon. I think they can, at their new stadium, as they did last year, can make a real impact. So lots to play for, both on the continent and at home for Lyon.
Yeah, and the final being in Lyon can only be more motivation for them, exactly. Really, if anything. A team that did not get off to the best of evenings tonight, Sam, and that's Marseille, who, ignoring the game that's ended pretty poorly with a 1-0 defeat to a relative, I think saying a middling Portuguese side is maybe being a little bit harsh on Vitória, but they're not one of the big three, at least anyway, in that division. But the headlines are going to be on Patrice Evra for what antics he got up to at the start of the game, showing how much he loves this game at the moment, really, which is not very much from the seeming of things. Going all Eric Cantona, it seems, on a player in a great kick that's more suited to UFC, I think, more than anything else. But an embarrassing moment, really, from a very, very experienced player.
It was probably the best piece of technique he's shown in a Marseille shirt. But unfortunately, it may result in him not wearing one again for quite some time. But we will remember that Cantona, with his own karate kick, earned a 9-month suspension. You've got to think Evra will probably face a pretty heavy ban. People already talking 12 matches, which honestly doesn't even seem that bad for kicking a fan. It's just madness. And as you say, he's one of the most experienced players in Europe. This is a man that's played everywhere, that's won everything, that absolutely knows better. The whole reason he was signed was to be a leader of this club, not really for his playing, because obviously he's a little bit beyond his best at this point, as he found out in Juventus. To just snap like that, I understand. He's a guy that's under pressure. He's being criticised rightly, but that sort of a reaction is just difficult to try and understand.
And worrying at the same time. It's you never want to set those precedents again. We were always worried about fans obviously coming onto the pitch, but that is, regardless of what the fans said or anything like that, that's unacceptable, unfortunately. And it's a shame.
It's not even self-defense as well, is it? It's really strange, because there's a really good video on the GFFN Twitter feed of I think he received quite a lot of abuse before the game, and he has been for Marseille fans for quite some time. But although there's sort of a bit of a ruckus going on, he just kicks out. It's not like he's like defending himself. He just kicks out at a fan. It's bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, it feels very strange, and we all will wait really for his explanation, which hopefully will shed some kind of light on it. But we'll wait and see. He's the first ever player to be sent off before a game in the Europa League era, at least anyway. So he claims that accolade at least. But the final team that didn't get the result they wanted tonight, although their group still seems relatively comfortable given their earlier results, and that's Nice, who lost 1-0 to Lazio. And I must admit, I unfortunately watched this game, and it was absolutely abysmal. There was me sat there prepared for about half an hour before going, I'm looking forward to seeing this interesting Lazio side that's played quite well in Serie A, but their two best players were left off in Milinkovic-Savic on the bench, and they left Immobile at home, and it created one of the worst games I've seen this season, and summed up by the goal that was actually scored with a corner that was flicked on, and Le Marchand happily obliged in heading it into his own net, which kind of sums up Nice and kind of sums up their season at the moment, doesn't it, Sam? I mean, I'm just reading on up to Jean as well there that this is Nice's 6th loss in a row in all competitions, their worst run since 2013. Damning, isn't it?
Very much so. I mean, a few months ago, end of September, we thought, well, they've turned the corner. They've put all the unpleasantness behind them. They're building again. The crazy Marseille game happened, and then it's just been 5 more defeats, just defeat after defeat, and they sort of sneaking into trouble in Ligue 1. I mean, they're only ahead of Strasbourg on goal difference. They really are struggling for form. Lazio are obviously one of the form teams in Europe, so there's no shame in losing to Lazio home and away, and the odd goal late in a scrappy game, again, there's no humiliation, but when it's sandwiched between all these defeats, it's really rough, and it's really disappointing for those of us who enjoyed so much their sort of breath of fresh air over the last 2 seasons. They've been a really fun, attractive side to watch, and it's a real shame that to hear you say you sat through that game and you seem to regret having done so.
It's just a tad. They were absolutely abysmal. I mean, it was. I don't think I've seen a game where neither side really had to defend well to stop them from attacking. It was really everyone in front of the ball at all times. There was no penetration from player or the wing. There's just no width play with Nice at the moment. The only person who seems bothered really is Arnold Suke, who tries so hard down that right hand side to make something happen, but there's never anyone in the box when they do get into that area. Player pulls out like he's a number 10. There's no focal point. There's no midfield. There's not a semblance of a midfielder at the moment. There's no width. They just are a bit all over the place, and they were probably lucky that Lazio did rest their best players. Otherwise, this could have been it could have been a real spanking if it was a kind of Lazio performance we've seen them against Juventus and the like this season so far. But let's throw all the Europa League negativeness into the background, and let's head on to our Liga previews. And we start with Friday night's game between Rennes and Bordeaux. One side slightly rising and one side slightly fading, you would say. And I'll give the one that's slightly rising to you, Adam, and that's in Rennes, who are playing ever so slightly better in recent weeks. They've won their last 3 in all competitions. Wins, obviously, caveats that they are against Lille, Dijon, and Montpellier. Although Montpellier were in good form heading into that one, but they're narrow wins. Are they turning a corner, or is this another kind of false dawn like we saw once they picked up that result at Marseille back in September?
I know. I think this is shows a little bit more consistency, and I think that given the makeup of their squad, these are the type of the results that they're going to have to be looking to get at the moment. I don't, as we've mentioned a number of times, although what a good player as Melish Sarr is, still only 19, isn't really a centre forward. He's been injured since the start of since September, so he hasn't even been involved in those sort of games. And he was sort of the focal point of their attack. And Brandon's come in the last couple of games and done okay, and Dembele's up there too. But they lack a goal scorer. They lack goals in general, starting with Mouassa. And Wabi Kazi's good for the odd goal, but barely prolific. And they're very blunt in forward area. So they have to rely on low-scoring games, and they have to rely on their defence. Joris Gnagnon a very, very good player. And the reliance on him is going to only be accentuated with this sort of makeup of team. And you look at games like against Montpellier with a 1-0 win. Those are the type of games they're going to need to be winning between now and the end of the season, given the trajectory that their season is on. And obviously beat Lille 1-0, 2 sides, and Dijon in the Coupe de Ligue, as you mentioned. two sides in the league at least who have struggled to score goals, and two sides perhaps that suited this Rennes side the way that it's set up. And with Lille not being able to score either, they you mentioned on the previous pod, it was kind of the battle of the calamities, and they managed to win out there in what was a relatively tight game. And then Montpellier as well. Montpellier find it very difficult to break teams down that aren't in the top six apparently. And given the way they played, like to counter attack and like to hit the space in behind with their fullbacks and their wing backs and some of their pace up front. And obviously Rennes weren't going to provide that to them. So this was two games that suited them. And between now and the end of the year, if they're going to finish in a respectable position, I don't see them challenging for Europe at all, of course, given the way that their season's gone, unless they sign a genuine striker in the window, which I again don't really see them doing. Perhaps, I mean, Gorkov would want to, but whether they have the funds is another question. Having spent that money on Sarr, I imagine they've got still some of the Dembele money left over, so there may be some opportunity there. But whether they're able to spend that is another question. So they're going to need to be looking to these teams that are in and around them in the bottom half of the table, and being solid defensively, not particularly exciting to watch, and nicking 1-0 wins. And that's something that they can do. Christian Gorkov, despite how the season has gone for him, he's still a very knowledgeable and very astute Ligue coach, and he knows how to get results in this league if you give him enough time. And although it's been poor so far, I'd still back him to drag Rennes away from the relegation fight at least and into mid-table. But they're not going to be very exciting to watch doing it, unfortunately, which is a shame. But that's kind of their own fault a little bit, and not signing a central striker. And even though we sort of deride Giovanni Sio in talking about French football, he's hardly the most prolific or most exciting strikers. He did offer them a focal point and a genuine presence up front, even though he didn't score so many goals. He could players playing off him like Diakabi and people around him, Wesley Said on occasion too, Kalulu occasionally too. There were opportunities there, but now they're a bit sort of full of midfielders and no strikers. So they're going to need to be winning games close and 1-0, need to keep the ball a lot more and sneaking those results. And this isn't so much of a turning point; it's more of a realization that that's what they're going to have to do, I think, from Christian Gorkov. So for their point of view, I hope it continues, and I hope that they sign a striker. But if they don't, this is what the type of Rennes we're going to see for the rest of the season, I think.
I think at the same time, though, that seeing Giovanni Sio again at the weekend when he played for Montpellier, the amount of great chances he missed didn't make them miss him much, I don't think. No, I think they were pretty glad to see him go against them more than anything. But Sam, we mentioned Bordeaux a few times recently that they've, especially since that Paris Saint-Germain game, have sort of fallen off in October. They drew 1 and lost 2, and yes, one defeat was to Monaco, but the other one was to Amiens away from home. But they showed signs of something against Monaco, but they're just not seemingly scoring goals at the moment. Malcolm's maybe gone a little bit quiet. Camano has maybe gone off the ball. Nicolas Depreville's still yet to get a goal for them. Is that where they're really lacking at the moment?
It is, but I think this maybe isn't the surprise that it sort of seems to be. I think some of the games that they won earlier in the season when they looked to be sort of rising up the table, the Guingamp win, the Toulouse win in particular, there was a lot of luck in those games. There was a lot of chances for the opposition going awry, chances just going in for Bordeaux out of not many. They didn't create much, and they're still not creating much. But now it's just kind of like the percentages are going against them. They're creating some things. They're playing okay as against Monaco. They were not terrible, but they weren't great. And it's difficult for them to know what to do next, what to change. They're refusing to change the system. They're sticking with the way they're playing. It's difficult with the squad that they have. There's not a lot of options to really change things. And if Malcolm, Camano, Depreville, if those guys can't make things happen, there's not a lot of other options for them to look at to change things. The midfield is a very functional midfield. It's not a particularly attractive, creative one. It's one that's designed to control games and allow the players to play. But if those players aren't making things happen, this is what's going to happen. They're going to struggle. And they're facing a pretty serious month of fixtures ahead of them now. Rennes first, then Marseille, and I think it gets even more difficult after that. It's who have they got next? Marseille, Caen away from home, Saint-Etienne. That's a difficult month of fixtures, and this could be really where we start to see that the problems that Bordeaux have are either fixable or they're not, because the problems have been clearly there for a month. If they can't be fixed over this next month, you can forget about European football, which seemed like it was within their grasp not so long ago.
Yeah, the real worry was if the goals started to dry up because of that defence, and it's starting to become a realisation at least. And Adam, what's your prediction in this one?
I'm going to say Bordeaux 1-0. Just a quick point on Bordeaux. I think there's a bit of a balance issue with them. It's getting the best out of Malcolm and Nicolas de Preval in the same team, and playing 4-3-3 gets the best out of Malcolm, and playing 4-4-2 would get the best out of de Preval, but not Malcolm. Whereas de Preval isn't suited to that central striker role where Gourvenec wants to play him in a 4-3-3. He's isolated, he's got no support, and he's not going to be able to hold the ball. And he's going to be their main source of goals, you're looking at their squad. So they kind of have to think, maybe does Alex Mendy play? Are they going to have to sort of rejig the team slightly? So I think it's when Malcolm's not, winning games on his own, there comes a bit of an issue with balance between those two players. But hopefully Gourvenec will sort it out. And I still expect to win this game, and just the 1-0 for me.
Sam?
I can't argue with that. I think Adam's got it. I think it's going to be 1-0 to Bordeaux.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And probably to your point, Adam, I'd like to mention that it might be an interesting idea to try Nicolas de Preval on the left wing. I mean, he played more of a wider role at Reims when he created so much before he started scoring so many goals for Lille. Maybe trying that and trying either Amondi or even Camano through the centre to try and maybe mix it up a little bit more. Might try and free the space for de Preval a little bit more, because he does seem to run into the areas that Malcolm wants to be in, and then Malcolm be in the areas that he wants to be in. So maybe separating them a little bit might give them a little bit more advantage. But to two teams that are picking up a couple of results in recent weeks, and that's Montpellier and Amiens. I mean, we've already mentioned that Amiens took points from Bordeaux, but Montpellier went on a terrific run until that was abruptly halted by Rennes last weekend. I mean, they got some great results from 2 draws from PSG and Monaco, and wins over Nice and Saint-Etienne. Adam, they really proved a lot of the doubters, especially myself, for really in that first month wrong. But do they need to now carry on that momentum that they've started to build? I mean, we thought that Saint-Etienne game was a good result, but the Rennes one, they had their chances, but again they were wasteful.
Indeed, yeah. I think that Montpellier are going to be a bit unpredictable this season, as it's proved already, to be honest. And the way their team is set up suits a certain type of game, I think. So when they do play someone like Saint-Etienne, who were at home and obviously had the onus on them to attack, that suits Montpellier, because they'll play with their 5-man defence, and Mukulele and Roussillon, I think. Aguiar, perhaps. No, sorry, Roussillon. Sorry, my apologies. Yeah, Mukulele and Roussillon, when he's fit, can attack from the fullback positions, and then you've got Casimir Ninga if he's playing, and Benson. You've got lots of pace, so they create space for them, and they can attack, and they can nick those 1-0 wins. And in those situations, that there's also no onus on them to attack. They don't have to go and win the game. They're happy to take a draw. And the way Michel Dezacaren sets his teams up in Ligue, and as he did at Nantes, is that they're very functional and they're very efficient and they're well organised, and they don't score many goals. And as I've mentioned a number of times, finished 14th twice in a row under him, but were lowest scorers and second lowest scorers, only above Troyes the second season. So he doesn't necessarily put much of an onus on goals. And to be honest, Montpellier are a team that perhaps their title-winning side aside, that they're not traditionally a goal-scoring club. It seems to be sort of in their DNA that they don't score too many goals. Even if you look at their top goal scorers, Laurent Blanc is their all-time record goal scorer, which is an unbelievable stat. And it just seems to be in the way they play, and they sort of continue that a lot this season. So when they come against sides like this game against Amiens and the game against Rennes, sides who aren't going to leave space, who aren't going to attack, who aren't going to commit too many men forward, it's going to be a terrible game of football. And Montpellier probably won't win it, because in terms of breaking a side down, they don't have the players in midfield to unpick a defence and to keep the ball and to apply pressure on a side that aren't going to give them the space to run into. And Amiens are definitely going to be one of those sides this week. So this may be, despite their win over Saint-Etienne, which was a great result, draw with PSG, another great result, draw with Monaco, those games suited Montpellier, but this game definitely won't. The onus will be on them to attack. Amiens will be happily take a draw from this game, and it could end up being a bit of a banana skin for them. So I think Montpellier play in a very specific way that doesn't necessarily suit a certain type of game. And the difference between this and the Nantes team that Dezacaren had is that he had goal scorers, people that could score goals, not prolific goal scorers, but Salah's good for the odd goals. We know he's played very well under Conceição now and Ranieri. And Bamu even scored the odd goal for him. So there were players that were a little bit more clinical, perhaps. I don't know. I would never call Yacine Bamu clinical, but there were players that could score the goals, given the opportunities. And I don't think there's a prolific or natural goal scorer anywhere near this Montpellier team. So that's the main difference between those two sides. And this type of game could be a real slippery one for them.
Yeah, especially because Amiens have had quite a nice October, really. 2 wins in Ligue. Win in Ligue, winning the cup as well, and a draw. A nice little draw against Guingamp last week, really. Sam, I mean, looking at the results, if Amiens managed to score a goal, they're at least guaranteed a point so far this season. In fact, that Guingamp result was the first time they've scored and not won so far this season. So it shows you how important that goal scoring really has been for them. But they have really sort of, especially in the last couple of weeks, been a lot more competitive than many people give them credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like they've sort of found their place in Ligue 1 now. Serge Gakpe, the midfielder there, he said during the week it was obvious that we were going to struggle coming up, from Ligue 2, getting a sort of first experience here at the top flight. But that now they've found themselves. They found their identity a little bit more. They've learned that not scoring goals isn't necessarily a problem if you don't concede them either. They have the second worst attack in Ligue 1, but the defense is excellent. The defensive record is excellent, at least. They conceded the same number as Monaco. I mean, you can't say better than that for a team with resources as small as they are. With a game in hand as well, say they pick up a point from that, say they pick up a point here, they're happily ensconced in the lower middle table. That's excellent for a club that most people probably thought would just go straight back down again. We talk about not having reliable goal scorers. Lassina Traore, if he's your centre forward, that's not great. They're not going to score many goals, but they've figured themselves out, and I think at this point they know they don't need to score many. They've got a really good goalkeeper. They work really, really hard, and they've sort of figured themselves out. Against Guingamp, they played for half an hour, down to 10 men, didn't wilt. That's not an easy thing to do. And maybe a few months ago they would have done, but this is a nice run of fixtures that they've now put together, nice run of results, and they can really build on that. And survival now seems no longer a fantasy.
Yeah, and looking at their November, it's going to be a really big one, really, for them. I mean, they play Montpellier in this one. Yes, they have Monaco at home in a couple of weeks, which is after the international breaks. That's not an ideal one. But away to Metz, home to Dijon, there too.
Winnable
games. They're really winnable games that might change the course of the season. They've still got a game in hand against Lille, which at least at the moment is winnable. They've got Troyes in a couple of weeks after that Dijon game as well. So they've got a couple of games now where if they pick up some results, they can really start pulling away from that relegation fight that might find themselves in if they can't find results. But let's see what you think in this one then, Sam. What's your prediction?
I'm going optimistically for an Amiens win. I think Montpellier will struggle to really figure out what to do against Amiens. I think Amiens will somehow. I think Lassina Traore. I've slagged him off, but I think he's going to get the winner.
Adam?
Yeah, 0-0. I think Amiens have really. I really agree with what Sam said about them really figuring themselves out. They're defensively, they're absolutely brilliant, and I don't see them conceding here. So 0-0.
Yeah, I'm also going to go with a sneaky Amiens 1-0 win. I've quite liked them in the last couple of weeks, and as I've mentioned, if they do score, they earn points. And Montpellier, a side that you fear that if they really, really struggle to get goals underneath them, if they're not really playing on all cylinders, and if they face an Amiens side that are likely to disrupt them and play a nice defensive style and force Montpellier to play football in front of them and try and attack them, and then it's maybe not going to suit them either. On to 19th versus 20th is the nicest way to put this one in, as Metz host Lille, two sides really struggling, but the hosts, Adam, obviously in 20th with just 3 points. This is a massive game for them and their brand new manager, Frédéric Antz, who we've praised in the past and we're a bit surprised he really left Montpellier when he did, where they weren't quite struggling as much as they did in the latter half of the season. Is he the right man to lead them forward now?
Possibly. I'm not as enthusiastic about Frédéric Antz's appointment as perhaps I would have been in a couple of other cases. I think that yes, he's a very astute manager and he did well with Montpellier previously. and I think he's a better option in this league anyway than Philip Hinchberger, who did very well to get them promoted. But I think he's perhaps a little bit out of his depth in Ligue, and as I've mentioned a number of times, they were very lucky to stay up last season. It's Diabate's arrival really that kept them up in Sar's emergence. Without that, they conceded the most goals in the league, and performances-wise, were one of the worst teams in the league. And although if you compare to someone like Nancy, who perhaps didn't have the players, but were performance-wise were their superior and beat them quite handsomely in one of the derbies they played against each other. So they were lucky to stay up. And I had a feeling once they got rid of those two players, Sarr and Diabate, it was only a matter of time for Philip Hinchberger, unfortunately. Hopefully he'll return to sort of a League club and perform well with them. But I think that it was only inevitable to see him go. Frederick Hansen is, as I said, a very knowledgeable and very astute league and coach, and there are a number of those coaches out there. I know that Frederick Antonetti was another example, perhaps not as perhaps a little bit more robust, perhaps, than Frederick Hansen. That may be an option too. I personally wanted to see Luke Holtz, the Luxembourg manager, get a shot. I think he's done really well with that team, and taking him from also ran in qualification to that fantastic point against France, and they didn't finish bottom of their group this time, and they've really built up that team. And there are a number of the players that given that Metz is so close to Luxembourg, that play for Luxembourg, Chris Phillips and the Phil brothers, and I thought it was a nice link there, and that might have been an interesting point. But going forward, I think it's still going to be as an astute manager as Hans says, that this is still going to be an extremely difficult job for him. This team is a Ligue 2 team looking at it. Jan Juve has been when he came in last year. I expect him to be huge for Metz, but he just can't stay fit. The amount of injuries he's had has been unreal, and he's still injured now. Barely played this season, and you would expect him to be a game changer. I think getting him fit and getting him playing well as he was at Lorient, he was fantastic at Lorient. It's going to be perhaps being the difference between keeping them up and going down. There are a couple of other silver linings too. Mathieu de Sevy's coming from Saint-Liège and done really well. I think he's been the best player for them since he signed. Played 8 games and stood out in each one of them for me. Scored a couple of goals. Really nice goal in the league. Set up the winner against Angers, which is their only point so far. So combining him with Juve could be a route to staying in division. But the problem is, much like some other teams, they can't score goals. And if you add Nolan Roux and Emmanuel Riviere and expect them to score the goals to keep you up, then you're in trouble. And I think that's Metz's main issue. Other teams in this league who can't score goals, like Montpellier, or don't score many goals, can defend really well. And when you combine not being able to score goals and not being able to defend, which Metz couldn't do last season, as I mentioned, they were conceded the most goals in the league. You look at Metz defence here. Bisevac has been phoning it in since he returned to the league from Italy. Philip Wilshire keeps getting injured and is an interesting signing, but hasn't been able to stamp his mark yet. Perhaps he's someone to come in, but he looked unfit and a little bit off, very much even off the pace in the cup game he played. Benoit Sokoto's been phoning it in as well since he joined Metz, and it just looks so porous and so blunt in attack that I just can't see how anybody would keep them up, because they just don't have the quality at the moment. So there are silver linings for Hans, but perhaps he can sign someone in the window to score them goals. They've got that money left over from Sarr, but it's going to be an extremely difficult job, and I don't see them even coming close, unfortunately.
No, but they might have a chance at least this weekend, Sam, because they're facing the forever luckless Lille, who at least last weekend, despite the defeat to Marseille, looked at times, dare I say it, dangerous.
Yeah, definitely. They looked better. That's not saying a huge amount, but they did. They looked better. They looked competitive with a Marseille side that are good. Marseille are good, and Lille took it to them. They arguably dominated the game, arguably walked away probably feeling hard done by, not taking something from that. And it's not the first time this season that Lille have been good enough to get something but walked away with nothing, and that's very much the problem. We've started to hear the rumblings now about Bielsa, the crowd calling for him to leave during that game. That's not ideal, certainly not going to help. Apparently his relationship with Luis Campos, the sporting director there, is troubled. Things are not going well off the pitch, but as we say, on the pitch, things seem to be improving. They still aren't getting the results. obviously. A point against Troyes is the best thing that's happened to them since September. That's not great, but there's still time. There's still time to turn it around. If they get a result here, which you've got to hope they do, if they've got any chance really of pulling together, if they do get a result here, win this game, maybe gives them the impetus to start moving, because it's not that bad of a side. It's a young team that they've taken a lot of time to figure out the way Bielsa wants them to play, but we saw the little green shoots in that last game, and maybe that sort of takes root, to take my tortured metaphor a little further, and maybe we see some more growth here, and they beat Metz and they go on a little run, and it's not time to despair yet for Lille, I think.
Yeah, there's little green shoots every so now and again, but I also feel that in a game like this, if they don't pick up a result in this one, it just adds a little bit more pressure. And I think this will be. I don't recommend necessarily watching this one this weekend and catch the highlights possibly on this one just in case. I think it's going to be 0-0. I think both sides are deeply in trouble, and I think it'll be a lot of effort, but not a lot of quality, unfortunately. What do you think, Adam?
I'm going to say Metz aren't good enough to get anything from this game. I think Lille 3-0.
Sam?
I think it's going to be furious madness, probably decided by the odd goal, and I'm going to hope that Lille can do it and win 1-0.
It's a tough one, but we round off with Sunday's excellent game, really, and we're all looking forward to this one, I'm sure, in the Rhone derby and in the in Saint-Etienne as well, which will be fantastic. They'll be absolutely rocking for this one. And Adam, they've been a bit more patchy in the recent months. I mean, we praised Oscar Garcia's side a lot to start the season, but they have sort of tailed off a reasonable amount, really, to be fair, in the last couple of months. They've been not as good in the month of October. They've lost 3, including the cup game on penalties, and they've only won 1 game, which was against Metz. They've slowly started to slow down on the goal front as well. Are they've finally been sort of found out after the first couple of weeks of the season?
Yeah, I think they have been a little bit. I think that it was very much a new manager bounce for Garcia to start with. We did praise him quite a lot at the start of the season. Justifiably, they were playing well, but I think that the sort of the trajectory they were taking under Christophe Gautier has returned a little bit, in that midfield is far too workmanlike to create chances for their forwards. Defensively, they're still very, very strong and are not conceding too many goals. But without Loic Perrin, they're still a little bit more shaky. And I think he's obviously a huge player for them, and it's doubtful for the derby this weekend. Stefan Ruffier has saved them on a number of occasions. If you look back at their performances over the last 2 months, and you go back to sort of the draw of Angers, which was a close game, they played pretty well in that. But then from then on, beat Dijon 1-0. They're extremely lucky to win that game. Ruffier saved them on a number of occasions. Very, very close draw with Rennes, who are obviously they're wrong into the table, and at home you would expect them to win that. Lost at Troyes. Troyes deserved to win that game from Motor's side. Another pretty poor performance. Metz, as I mentioned, are pretty terrible winning that game at home. You'd expect them to win that. Lost to Montpellier. So and lost to Strasbourg in the cup, as you mentioned. So I think it's been pretty average at Saint-Etienne for quite a while, and they're fortunate that third place is so keenly contested, and so many of those teams are dropping points and beating each other, that they're still in contention there. And they will be in contention there till, at least for European places, until the end of the season, because they're still one of the better sides in this league. But to continue the form that they started with under Oscar Garcia is going to be extremely difficult with this side. And that's something I think he's slowly realising. And even though the signings they've made, which looked good, Remy Cabella's actually played pretty well. Been injured for the last 2 games, but is a good addition. Jonathan Bamba's situation remains up in the air, with that contract extension, that he's sort of thrown his toys out the pram a little bit and demanded too much, and was removed from the squad for a couple of games, and whether he's going to stay is open to debate. He's a good player, but not prolific. And Lois Sioni's been really disappointing in attacking areas as well, not scored enough goals by any means, and it's sort of following that similar form, and that the overhaul needed is greater than the one that Oscar Garcia has been able to provide to really inject some impetus into this team. Philosophically, they need to be completely overhauled, and they need to think in terms of how they can be more creative in midfield. They need to think about signing a number 10. There are so many ways in which this team can improve, and although Oscar Garcia is a good manager, I think that the Gautier sort of formula is a route that the club kind of has to follow, given the makeup of the squad, and it's going to return to a very similar format, I think, for them. So this is obviously a huge game, and you're right. It's going to be. I'm really looking forward to watching it on Sunday night. It's going to be huge. I think for observers of the league, and this is the derby more than so than at least for me, more so than Le Classique, as much as a showpiece occasion as this is the derby in France. So it's going to be great. But Saint-Etienne still have a lot of work to do, and Garcia's a good manager, and he'll get time at this club. But whether he can improve on Gautier's performances with this squad remains to be seen.
Yeah, I always think if you enjoyed the Stade Geoffroy Guichard in that United game last season in the Europa League, watch it tomorrow night or on Sunday night. It will be absolutely rocking, and it's one of the best atmospheres you'll see in all of Europe. And they're facing their bitter rival, Sam, and they've been in fantastic form really in recent times, winning 5 games in a row so far, really in all competitions. It's just really impressive for a side that had a little bit of a middling sort of middle section so far of the first third of the season, at least anyway. They are finding their feet. Depay started playing well. Fekir is irresistible at times. They're finding space for Aouar in the midfield when they need to as well. They're finally starting to click, aren't they?
They really are. As you mentioned, that period when they were dropping all those points, they just couldn't win games. Really frustrating results. I mean, the madness against Bordeaux, somehow not winning that game, the frustration against Nantes, this just happened far too often. But they seem to have really turned a corner, and not only have they won 5 games in a row, they haven't conceded for 3 games. They've been blowing people away too, not just winning, but winning well and winning comfortably. And the way these youngsters have been incorporated into the side, Aouar, you mentioned, he's just looked so comfortable, so at ease in this team. And it's just a very young team. But they look so good together, and I'm starting to get very carried away with this Lyon side. I'm really optimistic that they can sort of do something special that in Europe or in France, I'm not really sure. I mean, perhaps in France they could win the teams not called PSG title, which would be an excellent result for a team that maybe didn't have those sort of expectations of coming into the season. But it's not just Aouar, it's Ndombele, it's Touzard, it's everybody just looking really good. I mean, as you mentioned, Depay finally showing what we wanted to see when he went to United, what we wanted to see when he came to Lyon. We're starting to really see that. And the boss of it all, Nabil Fekir, called up by France today, finally getting the results that he deserves for an excellent start to the season. And he's probably the best player in France outside of Paris, arguably.
I would absolutely agree with that at the moment. I think he's probably, I would say, at the moment on form, the best player in Ligue, I would say. I can't think of anyone else who's playing better than Fekir at the moment. Has a little bit of an influence on everything, which is so wonderful to see. I know we mention it every time, but there was a year and a half really where we missed what is a really mercurial talent, and at times possibly we thought were probably better than Lacazette and Tolisso. And again, we thought this team would drop like a stone without those 2 terrific talents. But the way they've evolved so far, at least in the last month or so, has been really, really outstanding. And credit to everyone involved, even Bruno Genesio, who has come under a lot of stick in the recent memory, at least anyway. But the important thing will be the result on Sunday evening, Adam. And what are you going for in this one?
I'm going to go 2-2. I think it's going to be a good game.
I'm going to go for a bit of a surprise one. I think Lyon will really possibly hammer home how Saint-Etienne have been in the last couple of months, and I think it might be 4-1 to the visitors. Sam?
I'm not quite that bullish. I think they'll win, but I think probably 3-1, I think, Lyon.
It's going to be an excellent one. Do tune into that one. It's always raucous in their own derby. That's all for this evening. My thanks to Adam, Sam, and everyone listening at home. Do join us again for the main show on Monday. But for now, enjoy your weekend of football.